All right. Hi, we are live. I'm Betsy with the Youth of Unity Alumni Network. I'm here with Charles De Turk. I want to make sure that this is broadcasting. We are getting this into our Discord server right now. Once we do that, we'll get started. Okay, it looks like we are live. I'm going to make sure they can hear us. And once we know that, we'll get started. Hello. Okay. All right. So it looks like people can hear us. Also, if we can drop the YouTube link in the comments, wonderful. Sounds good. For those of you who might not be able to hear us right now, we will. Okay, here we are. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I am, again, Betsy Junti, and I am with the Youth of Unity Alumni Network. And here today, we're going to have Charles De Turk do a presentation. I've been working on this Facebook group for a while, and when I was cataloging posts, I ran across a really long post at one point about Charles's experience, and then I became his Facebook friend, and he kept posting recently before the rally different experiences of being in the Youth of Unity. And specifically, he said something that caught my attention. And he said that, and I'm paraphrasing Charles, but it was like, being in Youth of Unity is something you only understand if you've been there. And it was like, that's so relatable. And then we asked if he would join us. He joined. He pretty much said yes right away. And I've been honored to spend some time with him on the phone. A couple nights ago, our whole team spent some time with him, just like listening to his stories. And it's really felt like you're definitely one of us, for lack of another word. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to share. So we'll let you share, and then later we'll do some Q&A. I'll watch the chat, but from there, I'd like to welcome you, Charles De Turk.
Exciting pleasure to be here because I'm having to learn new things, and I always enjoy learning new things. I wanted to start off with a question. Would you be interested, and this is a question for each of the people that are listening, would you be interested if I wrote you a check for $2,000 times your age? Would that be of interest to you? Do you think your life might change a little bit if I did that? Well, I'll probably, if I remember, talk about that later. I just wanted to throw that out as a little seed for thought for some ideas that I'll share after a bit. I was asked to share with you because I've been sharing a whole lot lately through a post that I've been doing on Facebook. This came about really because 10 years ago, I was on Facebook, and I probably had around 3,000 or 4,000 friends. And if you're on Facebook, you know that Facebook lets you know when your friends are having a birthday. And so every day I would see people were having a birthday, and their friends would say, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday. And then some of their friends would say, happy birthday. And then they had other friends that said, happy birthday. And some got wise and said, happy Hippo Day, and made up little things. And occasionally there was a graphic thrown in there somewhere. But I got to thinking, I thought, this gets a little bit boring because it's the same thing over and over again. I wonder if I could write a special birthday greeting blessing that would apply to everyone and not offend anyone. Now that could be a challenge, to apply to everyone and not offend anyone at all. And remember, I'm talking about 3,000 or 4,000 people. So I sat down and I started writing out a little message celebrating a person's birthday, thinking at that time of these people that I was in touch with through Facebook. And I finally finished writing it up. I read over it several times, as I'm wont to do, and I got a hold of a photograph that I had taken of a night blooming cereus, and it was in my yard. In fact, the plant is still here with me in my house. I'm about to give it away. And this all occurred right at the end of the year, right at the end of, I guess it was 2009. So on New Year's Day, I had 7 or 8 people that had a birthday that day. And I went ahead and sent this out as a DM. So it went just personally to each one of them. Nobody else saw it. And then the next day, I had more people that were having a birthday on the 2nd of January. So I sent it out to each one of them. And as I sent it out, before I would do that, I would look at their profile, look at their pictures, look at what it is that's going on in their lives. So I would feel a personal connection. I even made sure that I wrote the message that I was sending in such a way that it was very personalized. And I know that there's software that does crap like that, but this was my software, my fingers. And so I would go in each day for each person and say, dear, whatever your name is, I would type it in there, and then I would cut and paste the message and go ahead and attach the flower, and there it went to a bunch of people. Well, it turned out, I hadn't realized it in the beginning, but I have friends that have birthdays 365 days a year, including leap day. There is 1 or 2 days, excuse me, where I only have one person that has a birthday. It's anywhere from 1 to 2 dozen people. And I did that every day, every night for a year. And I thought, well, this has been real neat. But something unexpected happened. Somewhere along the line, about 2/3 of the way through the year, somebody responded. Now, I'd had a number of responses from people prior to this, but this one person in particular, she responded by saying, I'm 57 years old, and this is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Well, it blew me away. I mean, right now, today, this is 10 years later, I get goosebumps. Just thinking about this woman who I do not know, and the fact that something that I had written as essentially a form letter touched her in such a way that she felt moved to let me know that it had blessed her in more ways than it had ever happened in her life prior to that time. So as a result of that, when the end of the year came, I couldn't stop. So I sat down. That was the year 2010. I sat down for 2011 and I wrote a brand new message. And I selected another picture of a flower that I had taken myself in my own yard. I think that it was probably, might have been a Tahitian sunset rose. Somewhere in the beginning there, I know there was a gardenia. Anyway, I attached another picture, and come January the 1st, the person that I had sent the original mail to a year before, they got another message from me. And this message wasn't just about happy birthday, happy birthday. I talked about the truth about who you are. In fact, at one point I said, I need you to understand, be real clear, I'm calling you out. I'm wanting you to recognize that I know who you are. I know about the goodness that's buried within you, within your heart, within your mind. I know what an important person you are. I realize how unique you are, that there's never been another like you and there never will be. You are very special. And on this special day, when we honor your specialness, I just want to say, I love you very much. Or words to that effect. I don't know if that's what I wrote, something like that. So then the next year came around and I still couldn't stop because I'd sort of gotten into the habit. Now I'd been doing this for over 700 days, every single day. Long story short, I get to where I'm doing this for the year 2020. And I've been doing it for 10 years, over 10 years, every single day to what turns out to be just shy of 5,000 people. So thousands and thousands of people have received messages. Well, then another unexpected thing happened on July the 1st, this past July 1st, my wife died suddenly from a stroke. And I had a lot of consideration as to what I was going to do as a result of that. I realized that my life was changing dramatically. And I had written in advance my final birthday message for whenever the day came that I was no longer here to send those out. I had a final message. And so I went ahead and wrote it several years ago. I pulled it out and decided I was going to stop doing the birthday messages and take a long deserved break. And so I made some modifications to it to announce the passing of my wife. And I sent it out to everybody at once for everybody's wall to let them know what was going on and that they were not going to get a special birthday greeting from me in the future. I didn't know what I was going to do. Well, I started getting responses from people going, "You don't know how much this means to me. I look forward to it every year. And you have to keep on writing." Well, in addition to the birthday messages, I've also done a good deal of writing over the years. In fact, I've published 7 books and have about another 4 or 5 that I'm just about to publish that came about by accident. So I decided, well, what could I do to keep on writing and send out positive information and positive ideas for people to hopefully help to better their view of who and what they are and the truth of their being. And the idea came to me, well, maybe I can just go ahead and do a posting on my wall for all these close to 5,000 people to see, and I'll just write positive stuff. So I started doing that on the 15th of July, and I'm now on the 83rd posting. I'm working on writing that right now. It's sort of gone on the back burner a bit while I'm doing this this workshop, but I have gotten fairly lengthy in my writings on those. I do roughly around 2,000 words on each post. And the reason I do it is because I've got a lot to share. I realized a long time ago as I started publishing books, after I published my first book, I discovered that I had a lot of writings that I had forgotten about, that hardly anybody had ever seen. And so those ended up being another 5 volumes. And along with that, I've added what it is that I'm doing presently online. So with that in mind, I'll go to my notes. I've done the first one. The second one is spin some tales. Point out that stories I've found are a real good way of sharing information with people. I mean, this is what Jesus and his followers did, was they told parables. Why? Because it's much easier to remember a story where you can visualize what it's all about than it is to try to remember the text that's involved in that story. So it turns out that I've realized that apparently I'm a good storyteller, good in the sense that I love to tell stories. And I love to tell stories that have meaning that are buried within them. And hopefully that meaning will leak through and have an influence on their perspective in life. So it is in some of those stories that Bexy or Lizzie read one or more of my postings and invited me to share with you. And so in the process, that's what we're going to do today. Now, I've learned a lot in the 3/4 of a century that I've been around, and it'll be actually 3/4 Monday. I will have been here for 75 years. I'm getting old enough that it's hard to remember. But earlier in a meeting with some of you, we were talking about unity and how many of you, after getting out of Y.O.U., sort of drifted away from being involved in church. And that reminded me of something that is very, very important to me. To me, what I'm about to share with you is one of the most important things that was ever written and printed by Unity. Now, this is interesting because the book that this comes from, this hasn't always been in the book. Originally, it was in the book, and then it disappeared for a number of years from reprintings, and then it occurred again and reprinted itself. So let's flip one. Can we change? What do you call it? There. Yeah. Okay. This, before I continue on, what this is this is the Bonstell Theater in Detroit, Michigan. Can you go back one slide? This is the Bonstell, roughly as it looks today. When it was originally built, it was built as a synagogue, and then later it was turned into a theater. And my mother was an usher in that theater when she was a teenager. And in the process, she met a number of actors and actresses because they had, over the years, had thousands of plays and different performances that people did in this theater, which is currently under being rehabilitated. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is the inside of the Bonstell. So it's a beautiful, beautiful theater. And this is actually where the roots of Unity were laid for me in my lifetime, because one of the famous actresses that appeared here on that stage took my mother aside and turned her on to some Unity literature and New Thought ideas. And those ideas were powerful enough that they stayed with my mother in her heart and in her mind and in her remembrance, that when I was born and my brother was born, she passed that on to us. Let's try the next slide. Okay. And just a minute. Okay. And this is just a slide of an ordination class. This is when my mother, from that talk in the Bonstell Theater, many years later, she went into ministry, and this is her ordination. And this is Lowell Fillmore down here in the left-hand corner. And people you've never heard of, but many of them went on to become very famous ministers. Right to the right of Lowell Fillmore is Ann Sandifer. She was the guest speaker for this ordination, and her daughter, Diane Sandifer Stark, is a Unity minister up in Michigan. And so she was in Y.O.U. That's where I knew her from. I knew Diane, and through Diane, I, of course, got to know her mother because my mother was also a minister. And this is a little bit small for me to tell you who everybody is, but let's try one more slide. See if I can find what I'm looking for here. That building is, look at that. I'm going to try something here. That building was the offices for Unity of Dayton, which was the church that my mother ministered to for 32 years. Let's try the next slide. Okay, let me pick up back here for a minute. The book that I was talking about that contains what I believe is one of the most important things ever written and published in Unity is the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. And what I'm about to share with you, I'm going to read it to you, was printed in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Now, this was originally, the Bible Dictionary was first printed in 1931, and I took this off of its 26th printing in 2011. I have my own personal copy of the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary that had been my mother's, and this isn't in her copy. This wasn't printed in that copy, somewhere in the 50s or 60s, but they decided to include it again. This is what it says. It says the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary is a member of the Charles Fillmore Reference Library. It is one of the basic books containing Charles Fillmore's inspired thinking and teaching, which Unity regards as a vital part of its spiritual heritage. Charles Fillmore, who lived from 1854 to 1948, was an innovative thinker, a pioneer in metaphysical thought at a time when most religious thought in America was entirely orthodox. Co-founder with his wife, Myrtle, of the Unity movement and Silent Unity, Fillmore was a lifelong advocate. Now, this is the part that's important. Fillmore was a lifelong advocate of the open, inquiring mind, and he took great pride in keeping abreast of the latest scientific and education discoveries and theories. Many years ago, he wrote, "What you think today may not be the measure for your thought tomorrow." And it seems likely that were he to compile this work today, he might use different metaphors, different scientific reference, and so on. Truth is changeless. Those who knew Charles Fillmore best believed that he would like to be able to rephrase some of his observations for today's readers, thus giving them the added effectiveness of contemporary thought. But the ideas themselves, the core of Charles Fillmore's writings, are as timeless now and will be tomorrow as when they were first published. Now, as I say, this book was originally published in 1931, and to me, that really set the tone for a major portion of my life on how I dealt with unity and the truth. And some of you out there, like Eddie, know that you find yourself going off in directions that some people may think are not proper for somebody that's involved in unity. In fact, there's I think, an entire organization that's very much into Charles Fillmore, Charles Fillmore, Charles Fillmore. What I'm into is, what would Charles Fillmore have done if he hadn't passed away in 1948? What would he have done next? I would have loved to have sat down with that man to discuss the latest thinking in quantum physics and the latest view of metaphysics in this 21st century. That would be a real treat. Some people get caught up, however, in thinking that reality is static, and therefore if we can just grab hold of an awareness of a particular idea, that we're home free. We're not home free at all, because being static is not the norm. The norm in reality is change. Change is going on all of the time. Even if you don't recognize it, you may look at the picture on the wall or the rock in the garden and say, well, this isn't changing. They go, well, what time frame are you using? Was that rock always there? Was that picture always on the wall? Was it always in that frame? Was it always that kind of material? What was it like before it was photographed and chemicals were applied to it? Things are constantly changing all the time, just at different frames of reference as to how rapidly they change. So in the 3/4 of a century that I've been around, I've learned a lot from metaphysics to quantum physics and to the people that are in between. There have been a lot of people that have had a tremendous influence on me. Now, influence is real important. I want to go back to how I first got introduced to unity. After I was born, I was about 2 years old, just turned 2. My brother had been born when I was 2, 2 years after I was born. I was born in March. He was born 2 years later in May. And my mother wanted to make certain that we grew up in a positive atmosphere. That's an idea planted when she worked at the Bonzell Theater, to be around positive, right thinking people and people that were tied in with thoughts of new thought. That's what she was interested in. So she started calling around. At the time, we lived in the San Fernando Valley in Studio City, North Hollywood. Mother began calling around to churches and saying, I have a question for you. What do you teach children? Simple enough. What do you teach children? That's what she wanted to know. And she was astounded by the responses that she got about we need to help children to understand that they're born sinners, that they're worms of the dust, that by nature sin is a part of them, and they need to find ways of being able to overcome that through accepting Jesus. Blah, 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 blah. Mother hung up. She kept making calls, and then one day she called a Unity church. I think the minister at that time was a guy named Herb Schreiner, if I recollect correctly. It was an interesting church because being just over the hills from Hollywood, a lot of the people in the church were actors and actresses, and people that were in movies and on radio and in plays, and stage shows. People that were musicians, people that were tied in with education or entertainment. And so she asks them the same question, what do you teach children? Now, I can't hear you personally right now, but just think about that. What might they have said that was different? And here's what they said. It was 3 words. 3 words. Real simple. We teach that God is love. And my mother's response was, what time are your services? Those 3 words altered the course of my life. God is love. That was my introduction to what Unity teaches. And from that point on, that's the way I grew up. So we need to keep that in mind, particularly when we're dealing with children, and realizing the influence that not only our words have on them, but our actions. I remember a story that Bucky Fuller tells about a doctor who said that if a child grows up in a house where the parents read a lot, then that child will probably grow up enjoying reading. They don't have to pound it into the child. All they have to do is do what is normal to them, hopefully, which is reading. And if they'll read in the child's presence, not reading to the child, just reading. It doesn't even have to be aloud. If the child picks up to what it is that's going on, what are they going to do? They're going to do what we all do. They're going to emulate what they see because they think that you may be setting an example for them. So those 3 words turned out to be the beginning of my life in Unity for the rest of my life, always to this day. So one utterance can have a way of changing an entire life. So you might want to check into the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary if you question what it is that I shared with you. And one of the most important things that I've learned over the years in my studies, my curiosity, is had to do with prayer and what prayer is and how it works, how it functions. I've had difficulty with understanding that from my early childhood. I remember at 12 years of age, sitting down on the floor in front of my mother, who was in a nice chair, and crying as I told her that I didn't know how to pray. I would go to church, I would sit there, I would close my eyes when I was supposed to, but nothing was happening that I understood to be this prayer thing that they were talking about. So she and I had a good long talk about that, and I don't remember the specifics of the talk, but I do know that it helped to free me up from feeling any guilt for not being able to understand, and it freed me up to be curious. Well, that was easy because I was born curious. In fact, we were all born curious. That's something that we all share in common. And we are right now curious. We haven't gotten over it. Some of us get a little set in our ways, but still the curiosity is there. So, bottom line for prayer is what I've ultimately been led to, the prayer that I find that works the best for me. You ready? You got your pencils and notes ready? Here it is. Be still and know. It's the silence. It's listening. It's getting out of the way. It's stop trying to make it happen, but trying to get into the flow of release. Stop trying to do it all yourself. And hopefully, how are we doing here? We're doing pretty good on time. Yeah. So hopefully I'll get to that. I better make a note of that. A number. We'll get into that in a little bit more in detail because there are 4 things that I want to share with you. Everybody has their list of things, and so I'm going to have mine. So I'll pick up now to get into what you were originally interested in hearing me talk about, and that's Y.O.U. In 1954, my family moved from California to Atlanta, Georgia. We started going to church at what then was known as Unity Church of Christianity. The reason it was known as Unity Church of Christianity was because that was an easier sell to Orthodox people. And Orthodox, when you say Orthodox, we're talking about Atlanta in the 1950s. That's pretty Orthodox. And the name of my first book that I published is What We Believe That Makes Us Different, and then it's subtitled A New Thought Journey Through an Orthodox Land. And that's because even though I grew up in New Thought in the home and in church, I grew up in an environment that was very, very Orthodox. And so I was very cautious about sharing my personal beliefs with people because too often my beliefs didn't harmonize with what they believed. And that sort of left me trying to be the representative of unity. And that's a role that I wasn't interested in taking. So Wendell Mixon was the minister. Don't know the order of these, and I'll just let it go. And through my activity in the church and my mother's activity in the church, and my dad's activity in the church, and my brother's activity in the church, and our grandmother's activity in the church, and my aunt's activity in the church, and her son and daughter's activity in the church, we became very much unity there in Atlanta, a unity family. And so my mother began in the 50s studying for the ministry because that's what she wanted to do. And then when I got almost old enough to get into Y.O.U., I was promoted in advance by the sponsor to become a member of the Y.O.U. I think the reason for it probably at the time was because they probably didn't have a junior Y.O.U. And so they liked me, they promoted me. I walked into this group of teenagers and essentially was not welcomed by many of them. And to give you an idea of what I mean by that, when it came to electing officers for the Y.O.U. group, I was elected as chaplain, obviously because nobody else wanted the job. But they thought that I might be able to be the one that would do it. So it was almost like handed to me as a punishment for what it was that I believed. But I didn't let that bother me. I also didn't let it bother me when the minister marched in on a Sunday morning and took me by the hand or escorted me out of the class because she thought that I had been advanced too early and I needed to wait until I actually turned 15. So in the interim, right about the time I turned 15, they had a Y.O.U. rally, and I went to that, and that was in West Palm Beach. And it was a great experience. We took about a dozen kids. We lived in Jacksonville. We had moved to Jacksonville in 60, 50, 58, something like that. Moved to Jacksonville in the late 50s. We're active in the church there, and I was eligible to attend my first Y.O.U. conference, which was in 1960 at Unity Village. It was a week-long conference. It had somewhere between 250, 350 teenagers from all over the country. And prior to the Y.O.U. conference, my mother was graduating from ministerial training, and that graduation was taking place at Unity Village. So my mother and grandmother and my brother and myself got into our grandmother's baby blue Falcon station wagon, and we drove from Jacksonville, Florida to Unity Village. That's a 1,200-mile trip on 1960 highways, no interstates. Takes 3 days to make that trip. So we drove for 3 days to see my mother graduate from training program. While we were there at the village, I met Bonnie Grenson, and Bonnie was the executive secretary of the International Youth of Unity. She was the person in place at the school to coordinate and oversee Y.O.U. activities all over the country. So I met her, got to know her husband, and she said, well, you know, the Y.O.U. conference is coming up in several weeks. Instead of you making that 3-day trip back to Jacksonville, Florida, and then turning around and driving for 3 days back, why don't you just stay at my house, and then you'll already be here, and then you just have one trip left to make to drive back to Jacksonville when the conference is over. So I said, great. Well, one of the side benefits of that was between her graduation and the Y.O.U. conference was the UMA conference. UMA in those days stood for Unity Ministers Association. And they had their week-long conference, and I was essentially able to sneak into a lot of their meetings. I went to a gentleman who worked there at the school. His name was Dr. George Leroy Dale. He handled the retreats. And I said, Dr. Dale, I'm 15 at the time. I said, Dr. Dale, can you help me to get permission to sneak in to some of these meetings that they're having? Because they're topics that sound really interesting to me. And Dr. Dale told me something that was really, really important. One of the great lessons in life. He said, just go in. If they don't want you there, they'll throw you out. But in the meantime, you don't have a thing to worry about. They're not going to beat up on you or anything. The worst they can do is ask you to leave. So I did. I went to the meetings I wanted to, and I was accepted. I got invited because Bonnie's husband was in charge of maintenance at Unity Village. And so when the ministers had their talent show, at which they let their hair hang down and got real crazy, I was there for their banquet, taking pictures of all these people who were very famous at the time as Unity ministers, people like Sig Paulson and Bob Sicking, and trying to remember some other names. People that you guys don't know because you came afterwards, but in those days, there was a real aura of greatness around many, many Unity ministers. Hal Rosencrantz, Eric Butterworth, Sig Paulson, great people. Trying to remember, it was in St. Louis. Anyway, so I'm at my first conference. I'll go to a UMA conference, and then I'm at the Y.O.U. conference. And at that conference, I made friendships with 4 people. And I was real happy about that. And this is, I think you probably see this picture now, that if you see a picture there of 5 people, that's me on the left-hand side. Next to me is Ron Potter, who was a fledgling minister who served with Ernest Wilson in Los Angeles. Then is Sonny Richards. She later became a Unity minister. She's famous as an artist. She painted pictures, individual pictures of Jesus and the 12 disciples, and several of the people that posed for those pictures were Unity ministers. And then next to her is the redhead, that's Dick Medley. He was a sponsor from Pomona, California, and I know we have somebody here that was from Pomona. And then the last one is Tony Giordano, and he was a sponsor from Portland, Oregon, and had a beautiful daughter named Elise, who was a Y.O.U.er. Now, those four people had something in common that I didn't share. They were all older than me. I couldn't be older than myself. I was just 15. These folks were all adults. Those were who my friends were that first conference, because I was very shy. I was very shy. In fact, when they would have meetings, I would sit in the last row and scoot way down in the seat so nobody called on me, because I didn't want to be called on to have to answer questions like, do you believe this, that, and the other? Over the course of the next 5 years, I ended up moving from the back row to the front row, step by step, little by little. So anyway, you can run the next slide. And this is the same group of people. That archway that's behind them is a building that had yet been completed. It was the highway end of the administration building. And they had gone ahead and built the entryway, but they hadn't yet finished the building itself. It's since been completed. And somewhere in these slides, I have a photograph of the village from the air, and you can see that archway where we had our pictures taken. This brings to mind something that's also has caught my attention while preparing for this. You notice that the picture before this was in black and white, and this one's in color. If you look at the conference pictures, they're all black and white until 1972. And from 72 on, they're in color. And that brings to mind the difference there is between different generations, different cultures. And we need to keep that in mind in dealing with people that are younger or older than we are. It's like a number of years ago, a friend was going to have his 60th birthday, and his wife asked my wife if she and a friend would do the decoration for his party. And Sherry came home and said to me, "You're in charge of the music." I said, "What music?" She says, "For Jim's birthday party." I said, "What music?" She says, "1961. I said, "What's 1961? She says, "I don't know. You just fixed the music, 1961. This was in the days of Napster. This was a dozen years ago. So I went online. I found a top 40 list, a top 100 list. I finally ended up on his birthday 2 weeks later. I gave him a CD with 250 songs from the year he graduated from high school, which is the year that change slaps us all upside the head, because we're moving out after 12 years of this conditioning of the routine of education, forced education. Then suddenly we're getting married, we're having kids, we're going to college, we're going in the military, we're becoming a bum because we don't know what we're doing. But it's big change, and all of that change has a background that goes on, and that background is the music of the times. And if you were graduated in 61 and take that CD and listen to it, and I listened to every single one of those songs before I put it on there and sent it to him, it reminded me of so many things that I had experienced in 61 myself. I went on and made a special one of those for 1963, 62, 60, 59, 58. I had a ball until Napster had the plug pulled, and I could no longer do that. I could no longer get out there and get free songs easily, because I was copying as many as a dozen songs at a time. So anyway, I don't know what that beep was about. I hope it wasn't me. There's the first conference. Second conference, this is what you guys want to know about. The Missouri law back in the day was the law, and you had to abide by the law. If you're seeing a slide now, this is Bonnie Armstrong. She was the executive secretary of Y.O.U. for many, many years. That's whose home I stayed at for that month of June back in 1960. So in 60, or 61 probably. When y'all were having a conference at Unity Village, I don't know just what they did for where you stayed, but in my day they had a motel, which I think is still there. I was at the village 2 years ago, and we drove around, and I know they still had a hotel, and I think they had cottages, and they were like A, B, C, D, E cottages, but there was also a cottage J, and cottage J was smaller than the other cottages. The other ones, they all had four wings, but cottage J only had enough room for one person per wing. In the other cottages, you could put 5 people per wing. So there were several bedrooms, but in Cottage J, there was just one. Well, what would they have Cottage J for? Oh, Cottage J was for the black students, black ministerial students. They had to stay in the small cottage. If any of you know who Johnny Coleman was, she's since passed, but huge, successful minister. She withdrew from a direct contact with Unity, although they still recognize their oneness together. She built a gigantic church in Chicago, influenced a lot of people, dear friends with my mother and myself over the years. When I graduated from boot camp in the Navy, she was there for my graduation because it was up north of Chicago. And so she came to share that time with me and my family. So during that conference, keeping that in mind that things were still segregated in Missouri, there was a young guy from La Crescenta. His name was Joe Bergeron, and he hooked up with this girl from Detroit whose name was May Singleton. And Joe and May wanted to go to the conference dance together, but they were not allowed to. To this day, there are still things that touch me deeply. They couldn't go because it was against the law, because he was white and she was black. And so every year when they had the Y.O.U. conference and they had their dance, there was a segment of the dance area that was partitioned off where the black Y.O.U.ers danced, and then the larger area was where the white Y.O.U.ers danced. Well, that year, when they were told that they couldn't go to the dance together and dance together, the Y.O.U. officers went to talk to Bonnie, whose picture I just showed you. They went to talk to Bonnie and the other people that ran things at Unity Village, and they essentially said, look, you either let them dance or we're going home. And they meant it. A tremendously beautiful experience, like you've all been able to share in the Youth of Unity. These kids were willing to walk, to leave, if Unity didn't practice what it preached. And so from that time on, almost everything was integrated. I say almost because there was one thing that was left that was segregated, and that was the Unity Village swimming pool. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So also at that same time, I met and got to know a guy who became a lifelong friend, and that's Tom Butterworth. His dad was Eric Butterworth. And Tom is the kind of friend that I've got a friend named Verl Minto. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He used to do seminars in churches around the country, seminars called Alpha Truth Awareness. It was a great seminar. It was a 24-hour seminar. It was 6 nights a week for 4 hours a night. He taught things that I've never forgotten. I attended his seminars 7 times, I think, and attended it once when his brother taught it down in Austin. And Burrow, one of the things that he taught was, he said, I love you so much, I never need to see you again. That's hard for a lot of people to comprehend. He said, I've said that to my wife. I love you so much, I never need to see you again. People go, oh, no, no, I can't stand the pain and the agony of being separated, blah, 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 blah. You're not hearing what I'm saying. I love you so much that I don't need to ever see you again. Why? Because you are a part of me. Because we are one together. And I recognize that and I carry that with me. So I have a list of about a dozen names of people that I had that kind of friendship with. Many of them, there are people on that list I have not physically seen in 30, 40, 50 years. And it makes no difference. If we were to sit down here face to face right now, it would be as if time didn't exist. Because to me, that friendship is deeper than all of the things that time throws our way. So, lifelong friend Tom Butterworth, we would get together from year to year. For whatever reason, he stayed at my house. I stayed at his and Eric's house. And we were constantly trying to come up with new ideas of things that the Y.O.U. could do that would help to expand the experience of growing up in this wonderful teaching. And so in 61, we got together and we brainstormed. And ultimately, when we got to the end where we were about to part and go our separate ways, something would happen where we would find out that the idea that we were working on wouldn't really work the way we had thought that it would. And that happened for several years. Every time we would get together, we would brainstorm, we'd come up with ideas, and then at the last minutes, something would go haywire and it wasn't going to work. And we would just sort of have to leave it on the back burner and move on. Well, in 61, Jim Sherman, who's a minister up in Canada now, he was president of International Y.O.U. He did something unusual as president. He went from California, from Southwest, where he was a Y.O.U.er, and he went and lived at Unity Village for a number of months and worked there at the village on Y.O.U. stuff, and stayed there, I believe, with Bonnie Armstrong. So then in 62, my family moved to Ohio because my mother finally had finished her training and got a church. And in 62 at the Y.O.U. conference, Tom and I were sitting there one day and looking around at what was going on and kicking around some ideas. And I said, well, you know, as I look around, I realize that as time has gone on, this is like our third conference now. The old leaders are disappearing because they're getting too old to be in Y.O.U. And Tom, I think you and I need to probably spend some of our time looking around and finding people to become the next leaders of Y.O.U. Wait a minute. The next leaders of Y.O.U.? Hell, that's us. We're the ones that have to become the new leaders. And so that's what we did. In 63, we were at the conference, and a beautiful soul from St. Petersburg, his name is Johnny, and I don't know his last name. I probably never will. But he was a beautiful soul. He played trumpet in a talent show. He was from St. Petersburg, and he put on his swimming trunks and went down to the pool. And in those days, to swim in the pool, you had to have a tag on a rubber band around your wrist. And to get that tag, you had to go to a little booth and give the person in the booth a quarter, and they gave you a tag and wrote down the number. And then you go and put it on, swim. When you were done, you came back, gave them the tag, and they gave you your quarter back. Well, that was the way they controlled segregation in the pool. If you were black, you didn't get a tag. They didn't take your money. They told you to go back to the cottages, to the motel, because you weren't going to swim there. Well, Johnny was a beautiful soul, and this just savaged his heart. He could not believe at Unity Village that he would be treated that way. And word got around on what had happened, and a young man named Billy Johnson from Johnny Coleman's church in Chicago, he put on his swimming trunks and he went down and dove in the pool. And that's all it took. He did it. Or as you guys say, just show up. And that's what he did. He created good trouble. He showed up, and from that moment, that pool was integrated. The state of Missouri be damned. We went ahead and did what was right when the opportunity presented itself. So that was 63. Then in 64 or 63, I was elected first vice president. And then in 64, I finished that term and I was elected international president. And that year was when my mother was ordained. That's that picture that I showed you earlier. And then in 65, I came back at the conclusion of my term as president to my last conference. And I did something normally you can't do in Y.O.U., and that is attend conference when you're 20 years old. But if you get elected to a position of leadership at the age of 19, then you can come back. You could in those days come back for that additional Y.O.U. conference. And so that's how I was able to attend 6 conferences, 60 through 65. Tom Butterworth was elected president of Eastern Region, so he was back there too. So we were able to share together our long-running friendship in this last conference that we had together, and he'll pop up again in just a bit. So we've integrated the pool. During that year of being president, I was able, because of being president, to attend a lot of rallies around the country. Chicago, Cincinnati, Detroit, Shreveport, Unity Village. No, not Unity Village, but Kansas City at the temple. So I go to the one in Kansas City, and it's about the 1st of November, and I go a week early, and I stay with Tom because he's back there living up on Unity Ridge, and I stay with him and his roommate, who is Louis Molinari, whose parents were the ministers of Unity Panamericano in New York City. They were from Puerto Rico. And so I stayed with them for a week, and then we went into the rally. And I remember as part of the rally, both Tom and I participated in the talent show. We both sang. And as the rally was over and it was getting time for me to go back to Ohio, during the time that we'd been there, Tom and I had not done what we'd always done in the past, and that was to talk about new ideas. Instead, we were just 19-year-old guys, 20 years old, 20-year-old guys, teenagers coming out of teenage into adulthood, enjoying ourselves, having a good time, not worrying about Y.O.U. and the changes that we thought needed to be made. So it's time for me to leave. I went there and came back on a bus. So Tom takes me to the bus station, and as I'm getting on the bus, he looks up at me and he says, "You know, you got to come back." And I said, "Yeah, I do know that. I know I've got to come back." I said, 2 weeks. I've got some obligations and I'll be back. So 2 weeks later, I caught a bus back for Kansas City to Unity Village, and I moved in with Tom and Louie. And I got a job at Silent Unity. May Rowland, who ran Silent Unity at that time, got me the job. And Tom and I got involved in the Unity Village Y.O.U. group, and we started brainstorming again. And the Unity Village group at that time was studying some book. I don't know what it was, but they were trying to figure out what to study next. And Tom and I were aware of the fact that Eric, Tom's dad, was the chairman of a ministers group that had created a series of classes. I think it was a dozen classes on what is unity, what unity's basic teachings are. And so we said that would be ideal for teaching for Y.O.U. is to teach them what unity is instead of some other maybe crackpot thing that's out there that maybe not everybody agrees with. Everybody should be able to get along with unity because this is unity. So we had a problem with that, and that was that Tom and I had a reputation. And because of that, they'd sort of brush us aside and say, well, you guys are special because you're preacher's kids and stuff like that. So they wouldn't always take us seriously. So what we really needed to have happen was for that idea that we had come up with to be accepted without anybody being aware that it had come from us. And so we did what I teach people to do now. We put it on the back burner. We let it go. We released it. And the president of the Y.O.U. in Unity Village invited Tom and me over to his house up on Unity Ridge. And we sat there in the kitchen, and his mother made cookies and gave us milk. And we talked guy talk. And out of the blue, Alan Smith, the president of the local Y.O.U., says, you know what we need to study next in Y.O.U.? We need to study what unity is all about. Tom and I couldn't look at each other. We would have cracked up because he had just taken over our idea and made it his. And we didn't care. We weren't looking for credit. We wanted it to happen. And we were able to let it happen by letting it happen. So Tom sat down largely. Over the years, it sounded like I did it too, but I think Tom was the one that sat down and rewrote the entire series, geared more toward teenagers and young people. And that set the tone for the future. For many years, that was taught in many Y.O.U. groups around the country. My guess is it's long been a disappearing act to the dustbin. So what stories to tell? Oh, yes. In 65, some important stuff happened. Did I? No, I didn't print that stuff. I wonder if I go away, if I can come back to it. Well, I'll forget it. I'll run through this at the end. In 65, we had a couple of important things happen. One was the Y.O.U. elected Sheila Powell to be president. The Y.O.U. broke the racial barrier that finally stood in the way. And that's me handing the gavel to Sheila. To give you an idea of the kind of person that she is, over the years, it's a part of my nature to try to find people, find out where they are and what they've been up to. And there are many people that I've looked for a long time. Some people I never have found. Many of them I have found. Some of them ended up finding me before I was able to find them. But of all the people that I've found over the years, the person that most of them are looking for is Sheila Powell. Really beautiful soul. And finally, I was able to get in touch with her ex-husband, and through him I eventually was able to get in touch with her and to reestablish communications with her. And amazingly enough, I mentioned to her, I said, by the way, I said, did you ever know May Singleton? May was the one that wanted to go to the dance with Joe Bergeron. And she says, oh yeah, May and I are good friends. She lives just down the street. Real synchronicity. But things like that happen when you understand what's going on and you release and let go. So the bad thing that happened, although we turned it into a good, was that a bunch of kids got together and they trashed one of the motel rooms. In those days, there were 5 bunk beds to each motel room. That's 10 boys and a single bed for the sponsor that would be in with the boys in that room. Well, somebody had gone into one of the rooms and trashed it. Trashed it means they opened the suitcases, they scattered the clothes, they knocked the beds over. They just made a general mess of things. They didn't break anything. They didn't steal anything. They were just trash people. And that's what they did. They trashed the room and then they moved on, probably thinking that they were smart and funny. Well, when the word got around, there were a lot of people that were upset because of what the Y.O.U. had done. Now, the Y.O.U., the stories I was hearing from you guys last night, several decades after me, was that there were people that at the school that didn't really want you around. That's been standard with Y.O.U. down through history. And one of the reasons is because they have people that work there that don't have a thing to do with unity. It's just a job for them. So Tom comes to me and says, "We got a real problem." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, a couple of the kids that trashed the room are black." I say, "Uh-oh." And so we go to the room, and the black kids are all sort of off in a corner outside, worried about what's going to happen because they know that some of their friends were involved in this. And then word came to me that another person that was involved in it was my own brother. And I smiled when that happened, and I was glad that he was involved in what was about to take place. Because Tom and I were standing by the door. I told this story earlier before this seminar started, and so I'm going to clean it up. But we were standing by the door to this room when one of the workers from the village came out through that door. And he said, "Those GD end." And Tom went. And I went. Said, "No, we don't want to do it that way." And the word was that they were going to take those, there were 10 boys involved, they were going to take them and they were going to send them all home right in the middle of the conference. Put them on a bus and send them all home. And so I took a hint from my predecessors at International, and I went to headquarters people, to Bonnie and the people that she worked for. And I said, for all the time I've been in Y.O.U., I've heard stories year after year about the pranks that the Y.O.U.ers pulled on each other. And I said, I've even pulled a prank on my first year. It wasn't a prank like some pranks. What we did was we crunched up a bunch of saltine crackers and scattered them throughout somebody's piece of luggage. And I laugh. I shouldn't laugh, but I laugh because it was such a stupid thing to do. Particularly when you take into consideration how it made that person to feel. That's the thing that hurts me most in retrospect and thinking about that. Is I really wasn't thinking about what he was going to feel when that happened. That was 1960, my first conference. But later I did think about it and I wouldn't do it again. Anyway, I told the powers that be, I said, we've all been doing this. I can name a whole list of Unity ministers that have spread stories about pranks just like this. And I said, so I'm putting you on notice. You send those kids home, I'm going home too, and I will challenge the entire leadership of Y.O.U. On whether or not to stay here or leave with me and go back where we came from. And they backed down and kept them there. And the reason I did that is because punishment is not what Unity teaches. What are those boys going to learn that's going to be a benefit for the rest of their lives by being punished Forgiveness is what Jesus taught. Turn the other cheek is what Jesus taught. And yet they're at Unity School, which a place that is, many people would tell you it's like being in heaven to them. Heaven. And instead, people want to retaliate. They want to punish. So they back down. So that was a real good thing. We turned a bad thing into a good thing. And I got my picture taken with that marvelous Sheila Powell. So we trashed rooms. We got Sheila. The next thing I've got to tell before we get out of here is after I got out of Y.O.U. that summer, then Tom and I were on the phone, and we felt that it would be good for the Y.O.U. officers, along with recent ex-officers, to get together and participate in helping to plan the next year's conference. And we figured the best place to do that was at Unity Village. And we figured the best time to do it would be between Christmas and New Year's, because things were real slow because of the holidays. So we would just get in touch with people and say, hey, you know, if you guys are interested, why don't you come out to Unity Village at your own expense? Come out to Unity Village, and we will have a get-together of meetings and help to plan the upcoming conference and maybe put in some new activities. So when we shared this with the village, with Unity School, they said, oh, no. You guys don't understand. We take time off, and a lot of us may not even be in town, and that won't really work well, and take too much of our time. And besides, we would have to sit down and make up an order of service and print it out and everything, and that really won't work. Well, shucks. That's not the answer we wanted to hear. So I got to thinking about it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going out there anyway. I'm going to go out to Unity Village between Christmas and New Year's. I'm going to get myself a room, and I'm going to go around knocking on doors, finding out who's there and who's not there, and if anybody will listen to me, and we'll see if we can share some ideas and come up with some new experiences for Y.O.U. And so then I called Tom, and I said, this is what I'm going to do. And my brother's going too, and my mother's going too. And Tom says, well, I'm going too. And we called up and talked to Ed Eversole, and Ed says, I'm in. I'll come from California, and my dad will come along, and he'll bring your new girlfriend that you met at conference, who lives out in Newport or Costa Mesa. He'll bring her too, so you can get a chance to see her. And next thing you know, we have about 20 people that are all calling the school saying, oh, by the way, I've decided to come out and visit at Unity between Christmas and New Year's. And while I'm there, if you happen to be around, I'd love to talk to you. You know that when we arrived, they had a printed schedule, an itinerary for our consideration for these meetings that they didn't have time for. They had it all printed out. They had it all ready. It was a trap that was set for us to keep things just the way it had always been. But I had learned to make good trouble. And here's how we did it. When I left Ohio to drive to Missouri, I brought an extra piece of luggage. It was a 4-track, 4-speed Norelco stereo tape recorder and a box of tapes. And when we had the first meeting there at the school, and Bonnie and her people were in, and everybody was situated, I walked into the room with this huge tape recorder, put it down in the middle of the floor, and plugged it in and set up the mic and was ready to start recording. And Bonnie says, you're not going to record this, are you? I said, of course we are. We want a record of what happens here so it can be shared with the people that weren't able to come. Positive outcome, positive outlook, positive idea of how things can be done instead of looking for reasons why things can't be done. And so we had a great set of meetings, Out of that came a 24-hour prayer panel. Out of that came the Emmaus Walk. Out of that came the thrust toward eventually being able to do student exchanges with other countries. Particularly in our day and age, we were interested in Nigeria because at that time, unity was so prevalent throughout Nigeria, and unity hadn't been aware of this. Unity grew by leaps and bounds in Nigeria to the place where it was almost the national religion before they had problems with civil war. Yeah, I met the president of the Nigerian Unity Movement, Mr. Njoku, and another minister, Uba Oti, when they came to the United States from Nigeria. I was living at Unity Village at the time and met those two gentlemen. Mr. Njoku ended up getting assassinated because of civil unrest. But he was there to promote the unity message. And the ministers that we sent over from here that went there, they came back and said, we couldn't believe it. People would walk all day just to hear us speak. And they would get there and find out there was no room in the building. And they would sit outside with the windows open just so they could hear what we had to share. Really exciting times. And every generation has its own times that are exciting, and we need to look for them and make some more good trouble. So anyway, I think I'm supposed to wrap this up. I hate to have to do that. So let me see if I can get a quick synopsis here on what was still to do. My activity in Y.O.U., as I've already told you, as a Y.O.U.er. As a sponsor, I've been a sponsor in Santa Monica, Newport Beach, Ventura. I was a junior sponsor in the Southwest. Then one or two other things that had a tremendous influence on me. Around the early 70s, after I got out of the Navy, I became a fan of Buckminster Fuller. He invented the geodesic dome, domes made out of triangles. I used to have a whole bunch of models hanging from the ceiling in this room, but I had to take them all down because I had to move. But geodesic domes, he invented those. And I read a lot of his books, and they had a tremendous, there's a picture of him at his desk. And it's a fascinating picture because he's got his yogurt in the background. He's got a picture of his island. He's got a picture of him and his ship. He's got domes and models and all kinds of stuff. I wish I had it in color. That would be fantastic. But when I got this, it was around the time that the Y.O.U. Conference photos went from black and white to photo. So this is right on the cutting edge. So I wanted to meet Bucky, but I kept putting it off, procrastinating. Some of you may know how that is. And then one day I'm working at the church late at night, working on a bulletin, and my house companion calls me and says, I met a guy downtown, brought him home. You really need to talk to him. You really need to listen to him. And so I said, I don't have time for this. I've got a job I've got to complete. She says, but he's got a lot of stuff to say that I think you'll be interested in. I said, well, like what? What has he got to say? She says, well, for one thing, he says that Bucky Fuller's dead. I said, what? How come I didn't know about this? When did it happen? She says, you got to come home and talk to him. She said, anyway, she says, listening to him is like being on acid. I said, I don't need to be on acid, but I do need to know about Bucky. So I drove home, lickety split. I get there. This guy is in overalls covered in patches and knitting wear. I forgot the word for it. Anyway, he's covered in these overalls. He proceeds to take a deck of cards out of his overalls. It's a regular deck of cards. And he starts dealing them out, and he starts doing a card reading, like a tarot reading, except this is a bicycle deck of cards. And then when he gets done, he turns them over and starts telling you about all the symbology that's on the back. Well, he went on and on and on to finally I said, look, I got to know, how do you know that Bucky Fuller's dead? He says, oh, man, he's dead to the old and alive to the new. He's grateful dead. pulled the rug right out from under me. I got on the phone right then. It was midnight. I called Southern Illinois University. From them, I found out that he had moved to University of Pennsylvania, I think it is, Philadelphia. They gave me the phone number there. The next day, during the day, I called his office. They said he's out on the West Coast for the winter. I said, I want to talk to him. And they said, we'll send you his itinerary for the next 3 or 4 months. I got that. I called back. I said, I want to, oh yeah, I went to church and somebody came up to me and said, how'd your meeting with Bucky go? And I said, I haven't met with him yet, but if I had $800, I'd say I'd see him tomorrow. After church, this woman walked up and handed me a personal check. Personal check for $800. I said, Virginia, you can't do that. And she said, that's not what you teach. She says, you teach that you have to accept your goods, so go to California. So I did. I called his office. His office gave me his daughter's phone number. She was a professor at UCLA, taught dance. Her husband was a movie producer and director, and Bucky's office gave me his home phone number. He calls, I talk to him, and he gives me the name and the phone number of the motel that Bucky and his wife are staying at while they're visiting for the winter. And so I called there and talked to Bucky, and he says, well, you know, whenever you're in the neighborhood, just let me know. And I said, I'm on the way. He says, call me when you get here. And so I met with him for half, 3/4 of an hour. I had tied my long hair back. I was in a suit, a cheap suit, and he was in a bathrobe with the cleaning lady cleaning in the background. And I went in, and the first thing he said was, can I get you some tea, old man? This guy was in his 80s, and he's calling me old man. But we talked for a long time, and finally I said, well, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life. Okay, everybody ready? Got your pencils ready? This is what he said. Life. It'll teach you everything you need to know. You have no idea how powerful that can be. Life will teach you everything you need to know. All you have to do is be open to it. Be willing to accept that unexpected check for $800. Be willing to accept the fact that somebody else has your idea and thinks it's theirs. Be willing to accept whatever challenges you may face, realizing that there's always something that's just beyond, that's waiting for you. Well, I haven't done too bad. This is page 1 of 2. I think there's 2 other things I need to tell you. Yeah, one is I need to tell you what I've learned over the years that's very important, and that is prayer. Do you know how God answers prayer? There's a specific way in which God answers prayer. And that way is hidden in what I'm about to share with you. Let's see if you can discover what it is. I teach people now that there's 4 steps. People love steps, so I created 4 steps. There's 4 steps to getting manifestation in your life. Number 1 is you have to have an intention. It has to be a clear intention. This comes from Wayne Dyer. A clear intention of what it is that you want. If you don't have a clear intention of what you want, then your intention is whatever the hell the market will bear, whatever it is that comes your way. So you have to have a clear intention. Then number 2, this comes from Deepak Chopra, you need to release it into the gap. What's the gap? It's the transformational vortex. It's that place between you and reality. It's that gap that Castaneda talks about in the teachings of Don Juan. I don't think I talked about that this afternoon. That was probably earlier. But the gap is that place where you release your attachment to the intention. You no longer feel that it is yours, that you have to do anything about it. Because when you release it, you grant the universe the ability to handle the details. You let the universe handle the details. And then the last 2 steps Step 3 comes from me, and that is remain open to opportunities. They're everywhere. There are opportunities that enter your life for all kinds of things, all hours of the night and day, and most of them we've learned to just ignore. If you are serious and want manifestation, and you have set the intention, and you've released it to the gap and released your hold on it, then God is going to answer that request through providing you with opportunities that will lead to the answer that you most need. This or something better. And then the final step I learned from my wife, and that is to network, network, network. Let everybody you know be aware of what it is that you need to have happen. Don't make a big deal of it because you don't want to be attached to it. But what my wife always did was she would talk to new people, she would ask questions, she would listen, and the very last thing she would say, whether she was talking to you in person or on the phone, was, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Offer to be there for other people, and you'll be amazed. Now, there's a lot more stories than this. After my mother passed, I think I told you that I believe I did, that I was asked by a number of people to keep on writing. And so I created something called Extremely Eclectic Musings. I'm on the 83rd of my entries into that area. They're long entries. They usually last about 5 typed pages. And if that's too long for you, then go shorten your life. Don't worry about it. This is what I do. You are free to do whatever it is that you want to do. But
hey, Charles, I just wanted to
let me know the time's up.
yeah, we're definitely we're sort of nearing the end. I just wanted to touch base and say, we've all been sitting here rapt attention and really enjoying your stories and your reflections. And so, I really want to thank you. The 4 steps at the end, what a way to end on. That is such a strong, really useful set of tools that we can all sort of take with us. So,
well, if you didn't guess off of those steps, the secret to answered prayer is opportunity.
Yeah.
That's how God answers prayer, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. You got to move your feet a little bit.
The most important prayer you can pray is silence. Just shut the hell up and listen.
It's true.
And I'll take my own advice and shut up.
All right. Thank you, Charles, so much. We're really, really lucky to have you in this community with us. And we're so glad that you took the time to share. And we just thank you so much. And we look forward to more stories and more continued involvement throughout the weekend and afterwards. So if we had a real crowd, I'm sure the applause would be deafening. So we're just going to have to sort of imagine it ourselves here. But I'm really grateful that you came and shared some of our history with us.
Yeah, well, I'm always open to opportunity.
And it was asked if in the chat, I hope you'll come back to our Discord server, if you could post the steps. I don't know if you have that written out, but if you could post the steps, that would be amazing. And
it's written here.
It's written here. I mean, if you could. It's been such an honor to have you around the Discord server. Okay, somebody has started to write it, and
so where do I go?
Oh, it's back at the Discord server. So with that, we're gonna conclude this presentation. Thank you so much, Charles. We'll see you at the rally.